I'm here Thursday morning with Patrick Hastings. Patrick, thank you for coming in for the podcast, a farewell episode. We're both leaving Gilman, unfortunately, but we've got a strong month and a half left of school, and we're going to finish strong here with a good episode.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to be with you again, and congratulations on your next step. And it's been really fun to work with you.
You as well. Let's get started talking about Moby Dick, a book that we're both getting into a little bit.
Yeah.
You look like you're about halfway through. I'm maybe a little behind you. We had our first sort of book club with 3 people last week. Finn Tondro was there. Edward Brown from down the street was there.
Yeah.
But I think everyone in that meeting wanted to hear your thoughts and know what you're getting from this book. Is this the first time you've read Moby Dick?
First time I've read Moby Dick. It's kind of been one of those on the bucket list, and your idea of reading it, I think I'd already bought a copy, and it was sitting there looking at me, staring me down, and your idea to get a little bit of a book club going motivated me to get started with it. I'm at 312 pages. They finally killed a whale last night. But finally, spoiler alert, there's some whales. Finally got to see one die, a hunt be successful. So it's a fascinating book. It's interesting, very, alinear. It darts around, and Melville's really comfortable taking a chapter to be like, okay, let me kind of break down this whole thing and tell you everything I know about ropes on a ship or commerce or
different types of whales.
Yes, right. Like that chapter is so funny. I find some similarity. My interest in Joyce is, kind of what I bring to almost every work of literature that I read, and because Joyce is so heavy in my mind, and I appreciate Melville's comfort with detours and kind of going down a different path for a chunk of time, or and some chapters have very different focuses, very different styles, very different kind of tones. I definitely have some parts of it that I like more than others, but I'm also at this point like a confident enough reader to kind of be like, okay, I see what he's doing here. Like, I don't necessarily need to do a close reading of every different type of whale. I'm sure that somebody could, and they could extract a lot from it. But for a first-time reader, it's kind of one of those types of books where once you've read enough of those really big texts that you can
skip through a little bit.
Yeah, you can kind of be like, I see what he's up to here. How are you finding it?
Well, I love it. I mean, I like those detours, and granted, I'm a little bit behind you, but reading about whales and reading about the whaling industry, these are things that I didn't know much about. I did not know, is it New Bedford?
Mm-hmm, right.
New Bedford, and some of the history of Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard, and just learning, Nantucket and the whaling industry in the 1800s. I didn't know much about, so I like those detours.
Yeah.
Something we were talking about last Tuesday is why Melville is doing that. Is he showing off? Is he trying to prove that he has spent time on a whaling ship and he is someone who's trustworthy enough to, trust as we're reading this book? Yeah,
I think there's some demonstration of reliability there that he's trying to exert. It's also, one of those encyclopedic. Maybe he recognizes that this is a massive industry in this time and in the part of the world where he lived, and it's worth documenting, in a way that is embedded within a story, because there's a ton to learn about it. And I don't know if you've ever been to Nantucket or New Bedford or any of those places, but there are whaling museums. I mean, it was we have the Baltimore Museum of Industry here, and obviously museums of art too, but the Baltimore Museum of Industry, that's very unique to this place, this region, this city, and its history, in the same way that whaling was a massive, part of the culture and, the commerce and economy of those places. So I don't know. I think that there's something kind of fun about him honoring that, especially given that it's not a part of our, we're not talking about the lucrative whaling trade in 2024. So
Right.
it's educational for sure. So yeah, I'm enjoying it. I find it funny too.
Yeah, I do too.
I think it's really.
Yeah.
I think there's also a winking nature to that when he goes down those detours. That he's just kind of like, yeah, I know a lot about this, and I'm gonna kind of have some fun with it.
Yeah,
and if you take it with that spirit, I think it's really funny. Yeah.
Right. In a similar way that you've got Joyce in your head, the first book that we read together in this mini book club was Infinite Jest, and the spark note or the footnotes that David Foster Wallace puts at the end, which were so annoying to flip back and forth, and I totally skipped a ton of those footnotes, but the very long chapters about provincial knowledge of the whaling industry in this book remind me so much of Foster Wallace's
that's
footnotes.
very interesting. But he doesn't put them in footnotes. He's like, here's a chapter.
Yeah.
Huh. But I think we're both acknowledging that you can skip some of those footnotes in Wallace, and you can maybe go through some of these chapters quickly and say, well, maybe I'll come back to this and really break it down. Yeah.
And something else we were talking about is that there's total absence of women in the entire book. It's just all men, and I've it's interesting that there's not even like a mention of, I don't know, in these pages that you've read, if anyone's talking about their wife back at home or their girlfriend back at home, but it's all men on this ship, and there's just an absence. There's no women at all in this book.
Huh.
And I know he's doing something with race as well, with a lot of different racial groups on the ship.
Yep.
And the white whale.
Yep.
I got to that chapter, the whiteness of the whale. But I don't know. It's just interesting, these choices and what Melville is trying to do.
Yeah. There's a couple cursory references to the family dynamics. There's a great book by Nathaniel Philbrick. I don't know if you've heard of it, In the Heart of the Sea, which is kind of a nonfiction account of what the story of the whale ship Essex, that was kind of the real life version of the Pequod and what happens with the white whale. And he breaks down and spends a lot more time on the family dynamics and what it was like for the wife and kids who are left at home for years on end as the husband is out on these whaling ships, and that the domestic impact of that, and what what Nantucket was like with being an island with very few men around, because most of them are tied to the whaling trade at some point, except for retired men. So I guess I've been conscious of that, but I've also had that information in the back of my mind, so it hasn't felt as glaring, because I've been thinking about or kind of filling in those gaps with the knowledge I took from Philbrick's book. I read that a long time. I mean, that was maybe a decade ago.
I need to read that.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great read as well. And I think once you finish this, I would definitely go read that, and it'll give you more of an appreciation for this historical context and the way that Philbrick kind of fleshes out some of those dynamics. But you are a writer yourself. I mean, I've been reading your short stories. And, yeah, I love them. I want to talk about them. I want to break it down a little bit. And I've read your poetry. You're an award-winning poet. I'm not sure that people know about this. I want to try to flip the script on you a little bit here.
Okay. All right.
You received one of the highest poetry honors at Breadloaf School of English last summer.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. How did that come about? When did you start writing poetry, and how has that become a part of your adult self?
Yeah, great question. I started through Breadloaf with Professor David Huddle, my first summer at Breadloaf online.
Great teacher.
Yeah, he's great. He was awesome. And I was out in Montana with my friends hanging out, and I was taking my first time. I didn't really know what to expect. Online poetry class with David Huddle. We read a ton of poetry. He was great. I mean, he was very conversational as a teacher, which I appreciated. He would just come in and say, "What'd you think?" Jake, what'd you think? And we had assignments where we were meant to write poetry, and I was out in the beauty of Montana and messing around and just writing and having a lot of free time to myself during that period of sitting down with a notepad. So I sort of got into it there. I've always loved writing, and that's partly what led me to become an English teacher. But yeah, this past summer I took a poetry and Tai Chi class, and
as one does at Breadloaf.
And honestly, it was hard for me to get into because
Which, the Tai Chi or the poetry?
The Tai Chi more so.
Yeah.
And I think that's because I like to work out. I like to live an active lifestyle. And part of what Tai Chi is to get you into a place where you're free flowing and you're writing and you feel good while you're writing. And for me, going on a run and sitting down to write is just as good as standing out there and doing these movements, which I appreciate. I get it. And I understand the power of breath work and yoga. And I love all that stuff. But I'd rather go for a run and then sit down and write because that's where I feel freshest mentally. But yeah, I wrote a poem about my sister and her experience at West Point, which I've sort of been, on the receiving end of all her stories through the family group text for who knows how long. And she's always writing in our family group chat all these acronyms that no one understands, especially not my mom, who's not really into this whole military thing, totally anti-guns, and my sister sending the photograph with the M16 in the woods, So it's been really interesting to read about that and learn about her experience. And I guess I tried to imagine what that was like for her through this poem. But one thing I really loved about this class was that we had opportunities to write poetry about many different things. So that one was an ode. You're supposed to write an ode about someone in your life. There was another one where you're supposed to take up the voice of another person and write from their perspective. I chose Oppenheimer, and I wrote from his perspective because the movie was coming out. But yeah, I liked that class was very challenging for me, and I produced a ton of poetry last summer, which was, it's fun. It's great. It's great to look back on, and it's a habit. It's hard to write during the school year when you're busy, but...
Have you been able to keep it up, or has it fallen off a little bit during the school year? It's really hard, as you say.
It's fallen off. I tried some short stories during winter break, which was good.
Yep. I want to talk about those too.
But other than that, yeah, it's been tough.
So did you share that ode about your sister with your sister?
I did.
And how did she respond to... Did you tell her that you were working on it when you were working on it, or was it, here's what I wrote about you, or were you working collaboratively with her as you were composing it, or?
Not at all.
Okay.
And it's interesting because I gave the speech at her wedding in May.
Oh, cool.
And I talked. My main point of that speech was that we live completely different lives. Like she is in the woods without cell service, without anything for weeks at a time. And I'm in Vermont doing Tai Chi and writing poetry, So it's very hard for us to get on the same wavelength sometimes, but I think she appreciated it. I mean, yeah, it's an ode to her and all she's done, and I could never do what she's doing, first of all, because I don't really like the authority that I hear about in the military. She's constantly regimented, watched, doing what she's supposed to be doing, and I wouldn't like that.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. Her and her husband are both they're killers. They're insane people. Wow. So I think it's worthy of the ode.
Without a doubt. And then that poem wins this prize. Which prize was this at Bread Loaf? What was it called?
It's called the Robert Hyduke Prize.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's the highest prize that they have at Bread Loaf.
Yeah, it was
pretty
fun.
Cool, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, congrats. That's great. And especially for being somewhat new to taking that work seriously and taking it in a class. I know that was when I was at Bread Loaf, that was a very coveted honor. And a lot of people who wrote all the time, never got there. So you've got some true talent. I hope that you continue to develop it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'd love to put together a collection of these writings someday.
Yeah.
But it's really just fun. It's enjoyable for me, and it's one of those things that when you're working on, and this, when you're working on something creative like that, you can really get lost in it.
Sure.
And that's when it's for you.
Yeah. So your short story Christmas Eve at Uncle John's, I love it, and it seems there are a couple of things. I was thinking actually last night. There's a description as I was reading Moby Dick. There's a description of kind of what a tight space these boats are, and that sense of compression is it has an impact on your reading of this novel, or on mine at least. And I was thinking about that in your story. You've got kind of two different settings for that. One, I noticed the way you described the way that the father has plowed out and shoveled out the basketball court so that his son can shoot hoops. Son's a high school basketball player. And the banks that you describe, the snow banks that kind of wall in that basketball court, creates I think you refer to it a couple different times, creates like a pretty compressed and intense space. And then obviously the dinner scene, like in the billiards room, like you can kind of feel the walls kind of enclosing there. And that story is in Minnesota or Michigan?
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Yeah. Okay. And thinking the winter in Minnesota, the walls kind of coming in. I don't know if that was. I'm curious if that was an intention of yours as you were composing that, or
no.
But that feels. I mean, it comes across as all of those conversations amongst this family on Christmas Eve. With political tensions and as it gets tighter and tighter and tighter, those different walls that you've kind of made in tight spaces that you've created in that story really, I don't know, it like suits the setting, but also really amplifies, I think, the theme that you're working with there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about that much consciously, but I think I felt the same thing when I was writing it. I don't know, it felt like that way for me as the writer of that story, to be in those spaces where it's tense and the father's angry and he's got this temper and the political, like, I think consciously I did try to make I think it's Uncle John on one side of the table who's got his political beliefs, and then the father who's on the other side of the pool table, especially, that just boxy space. Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like that's partly drawn off of just experiences with family members. I like to joke with my English classes all the time, like, you've got one uncle who comes over and has this belief, and then you've got another uncle, like my uncles fight, because they just don't see eye to eye. And I'm sure it's that way in a lot of families.
Sure.
So I wanted to bring that in with the political piece too.
So the fact that you hadn't consciously, been trying to create those tense spaces, we get these sorts of questions in English class all the time, right? Students are asking, we're always wrestling with imagery, and you always get a student who's like, did he mean to do that? Yeah. Did she mean that for that word to mean this thing or to ping this other word that we're kind of connecting it to? How do you talk about that with students?
It's a good question. For me, it doesn't really matter that much. And I think I realized this when I was writing for the first times at Bread Loaf, and I would have my poems workshopped sort of in front of me.
Sure.
And I would have to be silent, and everyone's talking about what I wrote, and I was just like, oh, that's really interesting. Like the confinement of those spaces, it's really interesting. I didn't mean to do that, and I don't know if it matters that much. It just makes for an interesting conversation in English class. And yeah, of course, our authors and writers are intentional about a lot, but there's a lot of things that are just maybe natural or unconscious that weave themselves in there.
Sure.
And that's fine too. I mean, it's all for conversation. It's something to think about. So I think it's important to be intentional as a writer, but as someone who's just talking about it, I don't know, we'll never know the answer if Virginia Woolf meant that, but it makes for an interesting dialogue.
Yeah. And there's that I think there's like two sides. It's two sides of the same kind of creative coin, that we can be creative as readers as we create meaning across the text and, imagining the creativity of the author, but also allowing that the author might have just been creative in depicting that scene and thinking about that basketball court being walled in by these banks of snow. But, thinking about that story, the way that it works, if this was an English class and we were doing this, because ultimately that story builds towards that conclusion, that climactic moment, another intense back and forth between these uncles in a tight Christmas dinner room, and the son kind of out of nowhere, who has not had much of a voice in any of these debates, releases that pressure with, expressing his voice and kind of stepping into the fray to call for peace and call for kind of stopping this. And, there's like this, I don't know, I couldn't help but think about those generational change moments, or like assertion of a younger generation asking for a change in what has developed within a family, as like, this is the pattern of how we behave. And then the younger generation be like, that, no, thank you. Actually, can we not do that? Let's break that cycle.
Right.
And that assertion of kind of a mature younger generation, recognizing that they have, the ability and the vision to see something, a different path forward. And I guess it just had me thinking about this new path that you have coming, path to follow. You're about to follow a new path going up to Connecticut and teaching at another boys' school. And, you've taken a lot of experiences from your time here at Gilman and from teaching these classes. Like, what are you, as you kind of like maybe have one of these moments where you get to chart a new path and say, let's do something differently, or like, what are you going to take from Gilman that you really loved, and what are you thinking like, okay, this is cool, I understand why it's done this way, but I'm thinking about kind of moving with my own path forward?
Well, one of the things I love about Gilman is that you've got freedom in the classroom to sort of do what you want. And I think what's interesting about Gilman, and I always say this is the best thing about Gilman and also maybe the worst thing, is the freedom, because I appreciate it. I know sort of how to use my time and, dedicate my time to lesson planning, teaching a class, and then having the ability to do something else or go somewhere else or go get a coffee down at Starbucks. Whereas the students have a lot of free time, but they don't necessarily know yet how to do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's good because it prepares them for college, and you're going to have a lot of free time at the next stage.
Yep.
But that's one of the things I really appreciate as a teacher, is that I can come in and read, we could read the first chapter of Moby Dick in American Lit today, and no one would bat an eye.
No, be fine.
And that's sort of what I was looking for when I was looking to move up to Connecticut. Is Brunswick seems very similar in that way. And I think it's the best for us teachers, is it allows us to bring what we like, what we're interested in, into the room. And in some ways it doesn't really matter if it makes a whole lot of sense curriculum-wise, or it's sort of pulling things in when, I don't know, maybe the timing isn't right, but it makes sense to you as a teacher, and I think that energy feeds off of the students.
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally infectious. When you're teaching something and you feel stale about it, we were talking a couple minutes ago, right before we started, about changing up the English 10 curriculum. That is almost always driven by teachers feeling like, I feel like I've done this. I know how this conversation goes. I know what I'm doing with this. I want to teach something that I don't necessarily know what I'm doing with, and like see what bursts of inspiration or understanding or confusion I bring into the classroom, teaching a new text, or, wrestling with a different poem than we've taught at this point in the year. Those sorts of things. The kids certainly feed off that. And, you mentioned like using our time. I mean, you've done this, you've used your time to make this podcast, which has been such an important part of the 2020s of Gilman, which has been such a weird time. And, this, the value of this as a community building, kind of conversation starter since COVID. And, I think that this whole school community appreciates what you've done with this. And I'll speak on behalf of everybody here to say thank you for the time that you have given of yourself, and to prepare for these, to record all these. Cesare, thank you for doing all this work.
Yeah.
This has been a really, really cool use of that time that you referenced. You've also worked in the art room. You've worked with the squash team, you've worked with the tennis team, you worked with the lacrosse team, you've worked with younger kids doing tennis clinics. Like, I think it's worth you kind of like walk us through all the different ways that you have impacted this community in your 6 years here. 7?
Yeah, this is year 6.
6,
year
okay.
6. I think that's the best thing about Gilman, is that it offers you so many different opportunities to explore different areas, and that's sort of what I said in my interview when I first talked to you and Brian. And Rob Huback and Henry is I like to wear different hats. I like to change things up, and you're talking about changing the curriculum. Like I teach a couple similar books every year, but I also just choose a brand new slate, which is difficult because then I got to read and keep up. And
you've taught history this year too. That's the first time you've taught history here at Gilman.
Teaching history this year, relearning American history. But that's part of the reason I wanted to become a teacher, is that you're constantly mentally stimulated, right? I don't like just sitting around and being bored. Like I need to be learning and mentally on at all times. So, everything that I've done at Gilman has just been sort of fun. It's been a new challenge and a new situation, and podcast, I'm talking to different people with different worldviews all the time and different strategies, and it's fun for me. I mean, I honestly don't really care how many people watch these, as long as I get something out of the conversation and I talk to someone and learn something new. So not sure what's going to become of the podcast, but it's been a lot of fun these past 3 years doing it.
Well, it's how many episodes have you recorded?
This is 161.
That's insane. I mean, there's something, the archives of Gilman School, this is like a part of that. You have 161 conversations that are largely about Gilman, about teaching, about this community, its history, the students, the teachers, the parents, the coaches, all these different members of the community. I mean, this is like archival material that especially given the unusual nature of these past 4 years since you started doing it, and what we were all thinking about, and transitioning into all these different in and out of hybrid and the emergence of AI. I mean, like this is an interesting time to be alive and to be having these sorts of conversations. So I think it's a really
capsule.
Cool thing. It is, yeah. We'll look back, and I think the school will be blessed to have this as like a documentary sort of set of material and conversations. It's really cool.
Yeah, if you look back at the episodes, we had our plexiglass hanging right here, and guests are wearing masks, and we put this thing in, which I don't even know if it does much, but that was there just to make the guests comfortable.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember coming in and kind of asking if we were wearing masks or not, because but you were like, well, we've got the plexiglass, which I'm not sure if that did anything, but we don't know, who knows. We didn't get COVID during our interview. We were all good. Yeah. Crazy.
Let me ask you about your next step, Library of Congress next year, and sort of what's on your mind as you're leaving Gilman. That's a big change too. I mean, for me, I'm going to an all-boys school that's in a lot of ways similar to Gilman, so I don't feel like I'm going to really have to change too much about what I'm doing. But how do you feel about this transition coming up for yourself?
Yeah, this is going to be a bigger change. My wife, Martha, has pointed out that I'm finally leaving school at age 41. That I've never not been in a school of some sort or on a school calendar. So that's going to be, there's going to be a big change in terms of not being around kids all day, being around adults all day. And so there are certainly, I get so much energy and I have so much fun with our students here. And I'm going to miss that, obviously. But at the same time, I'm kind of at like a little bit of a moment where I do feel really excited for the opportunity to do more writing, to do more research, to do more presenting, to kind of lean into what has kind of become a side gig, and a side gig that's kind of gotten bigger and bigger over the past 2 or 3 years, that I've been kind of doing at 4 a.m. or, in the kind of the shadows of the day, to kind of really invest the daylight hours into doing that kind of work. And yeah, so, I'm excited for that opportunity to scratch an itch as somebody who does enjoy research and writing and presenting and putting those things together and learning, and then yielding an output on that, which of course we're doing every day when we're teaching, but to have a little bit more pressure to write and publish and things like that. So that's going to be, I think that's, I was kind of feeling that itch, and then this opportunity just kind of emerged, and it just kind of seemed like it was too good to pass up. So I'll be working in the Rare Books and Special Collections division down at the Library of Congress, working with those materials, and I'm going to have a ton to learn because that is not my background. I've done obviously research and writing and presenting on specific copies of Joyce's Ulysses, but I have not done much of that on other things. And I think I have some ideas of how I will go about doing that, and what else from within that collection I'm going to be really excited to work with from the very beginning. But there's going to be a lot of learning. I'm going to have a lot to learn, and I'm going to have great mentors down there who are going to guide me. And I'm hopeful that the fact that I have never seen a Shakespeare First Folio, much less held it in my hand, that that naivete that I'll bring to this job and this work is going to be an asset rather than a liability, because I'm not kind of like, ho-hum, another Shakespeare First Folio. Yeah, I've seen these for the past 20 years because this is what I do. I'm going to be like hopefully be able to voice that excitement of like, oh my gosh, are you serious? Like, this is a first edition T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Like, can we just like nerd out about how cool this is that we're right here and it's signed by Eliot and addressed to who did he address this? Kind of go down those rabbit holes with that enthusiasm, because I do love working with those materials, and I have a lot of fun with that work when I've been able to do it. So it'll be an interesting new challenge, and but I know that I'm going to miss teaching. One of the benefits of this opportunity is that it's a 5-year NTE, which is a not to exceed post, which they've assured me like it'll either get rolled into another NTE or we'll find another permanent. I've said, look, don't sweat it. Like, I could totally see doing 5 years of this and enjoying it, but scratching the itch of writing, and wanting to get back in the classroom. So I think it'll be a fun little kind of detour, but I know that I'm going to miss teaching. I know that I'm going to miss coaching. I know that I'm going to miss Gilman. But we're also fortunate that I have 3 boys here. I'm still going to be connected to the school in that regard. We're not moving. I'll take the train down, so still be really plugged in. So it's a little bit of kind of getting to have my cake and eat it too, a little bit, in that I'll still be a part of the Gilman community, with my sons being here and loving the place, and while still getting to kind of go do something like this. So I'm excited.
Now, when you say that you're going to be writing a lot and working with this collection, how big is the team that you're working with? How big is the collection in general of the rare books, and what will you be writing about?
So I think it'll be the sort, one scenario. So they've got a couple different things that they've kind of talked to me about working on. One is kind of an online, what they're calling From Cuneiform to the Cloud, kind of the history of human communication. And so I think that will be everywhere from, some, let's say there's a high school English teacher in San Antonio who's about to start teaching The Great Gatsby and happens to Google first edition Great Gatsby because they want to have some sense of like, when was this published or whatever, like what I would write and research and, kind of put up, okay, they made this many copies of the first edition. This was what the cover art looked like. This is how involved Fitzgerald was in the revision process once it was at proof stage. This was his agent. This was his royalty structure. Those sorts of, I find those sorts of stories interesting to tell, and to learn. Mm-hmm. So where that high school English teacher in San Antonio might Google this and then find like my video and images of the copies that are in the collection, with my write-up that they could maybe use as part of their introductory lesson plan, when they're introducing The Great Gatsby. So there's going to be some writing along those lines. I've been kind of learning a lot about the early iterations of the book and as like a commodity, like something that people made and bought and sold and traded, and the commercial kind of structures that had to be built around that, because it was outside of the guild structure. Back in the 1400s, it was because it was an entrepreneurial sort of thing. So you had some, there's some interesting opportunities for people who didn't want to go through the steps of an apprenticeship, to become a master stonemason or whatever. They could be like, I'm going to go into printing, work in a printing press, and I can get a lot higher, faster if I'm demonstrate talent, because there was not the structure, the kind of guild hierarchy, and kind of like systematic progression through that career. So I find that sort of stuff pretty interesting and I'm coming to it with pretty fresh eyes and learning a lot about that, and book fairs, and okay, then they had to develop warehouses for storing the books, but they were really heavy and susceptible to the elements and made of leather, and all the different materials, and how they would transport them down the rivers. And it was just so kind of learning a lot about that. I'll be kind of, I think, needing to continue to develop a knowledge base that I can use to write about different items that are in the collection. It is a huge collection. It is one of, if not the largest collection of rare book materials in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, it is massive. And I think that they've told me, as I've been kind of talking with the folks who are on the team, and it's a pretty small team for the Library of Congress. I think there's only like a dozen people who work in the Rare Books and Special Collections division. But they've, kind of said, like, the first year, like, we want you just like hanging out in the vault, like go walk through, find stuff that you're interested in, start poking around, research, like kind of trust your instincts. And then they'll be kind of guiding me and bringing me along to this experience and that. I'm not going to have much like authority to buy items that would be, kind of filling gaps within the collection, but that's part of what they do, is go to, the New York Book Fair and try to procure more items for the collection that they don't currently have, or that they think would be important to stories that they want to tell. So, that sort of stuff. They want me to build a teaching collection of items from the vaults that they're not worried about putting out for like the 9th grade September sweaty field trip that comes through the library. Like I'm going to be the person who's always raising my hand for like, oh yeah, there's a school group coming through. Let me hang out with those 7th graders. Let me show them some of this cool stuff and tell them a story about these 4 books, and how the United States came to possess them, and who donated them, or when we bought them and why, and like do some of that kind of the tell the story of why the United States has invested as a democracy in books, in education, in kind of being custodians of these rare materials, like why that matters, and the location of the Library of Congress right there by the Capitol, by the Supreme Court, like central to our democracy, that we should be learning, that we should be applying knowledge and developing our understanding through reading, through thinking, through writing, through the engagement with ideas, that should be at the core of what our country is. Like, all of that's really exciting to me, to be able to kind of be a very, very, very small part of that. But it feels, so I guess there's like a patriotic element to making this shift too, that I want to work for the United States and do something for the United States in 2024.
Right. It's really interesting, because in a lot of ways you're still going to be teaching every day, right? Yep. And you're still going to be learning, and you're still going to be stimulating your mind like you do at Gilman. But you're also, we just read 1984 in my 3-person British novels class.
Yeah,
and
tight group.
So much of that book is about destroying knowledge and getting rid of books, and dictatorships in the 1900s, right? Destroying these materials. And I think you're totally right in saying that the Library of Congress is a beacon of our democracy in preserving these materials and sharing this knowledge with Americans.
Yeah. I'm excited to be on the front lines of that. It'll be kind of cool. And I know that my experience here at Gilman has been really central to my ability to do that hopefully at a high level. And I'll be thinking about my colleagues and students that I've learned so much from as I go about this new challenge. I'll definitely be kind of carrying my Gilman experience every single day when I go down there. I'm excited, but I'm very grateful to what these 17 years here have been and what I've learned here.
Well, we're going to miss you a lot, and I'm going to miss you personally. You've been a fantastic department head. I couldn't ask for a better department head, honestly. Through our meetings and just our discussions with each other, I've really valued those, talking about books and talking about AI and the future and all that stuff. So I'm still going to call you up and have those discussions, but it's been a great time here at Gilman, and thank you for coming in today.
Totally my pleasure. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to watch you grow as a teacher over these last 6 years, and wishing you all the best. All of Gilman is grateful to you and for what you've done here, what you've done in the classroom, on the fields. You've been fantastic. So you have a lot to be proud of, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank you, Cesar.